How do you describe your life as a consultant? Because everybody describes it slightly differently. And so when people are looking at engineering as a degree program, oftentimes they don't know that this is a highly common element because, for lack of a better term, you're almost like a mercenary engineer. Like
Yeah.
you're going into all sorts of different companies and solving problems for them. But that's my crude
Yeah.
version of it.
I know it's like you've been a consultant yourself. That's essentially it. I mean, you're sort of kind of like airdropped in to solve kind of a critical problem. The kind of work that I do now is more on the strategy consulting side. So I work still in pharmaceuticals and life sciences, but kind of helping companies get their drugs to market and launching. And yeah, you kind of dropped in for 8 weeks, roughly 8 to 10 weeks. And we typically will do some assessments. We'll kind of go out and try and understand the market landscape and then come back and say, here's what you got to do. Here's how you have to implement it, things like that. So yeah, it's basically like kind of like intense problem solving, but with really like a cool team of people
Mm.
and kind of working day to day with the clients as well. So definitely some overlap. And like you said, I think so many of us that graduated went into consulting and then maybe went on to future things or maybe stuck with it.
Are you able, to the point at which you are able to or comfortable? Can you talk about some of those problems that you solved or clients that you've worked with?
Yeah, I could talk about it at kind of a high level, but
Sure.
one of the things that we are dealing with right now is that many pharmaceutical companies are launching drugs for more rare diseases. So, things that don't have cures necessarily at the moment. Um, and a lot of those therapies can be quite expensive because they need to be personalized to your specific biomarkers or, something specific to you. And I think a lot of the problems we're solving are, what are some ways we can ensure that patients are getting access to these drugs, but also that companies are getting the funding to continue to invest in research and development to support it. So it's a bit of a balance there. A lot of what I do is assess kind of different policy shifts in different countries and understanding how we can best kind of get these drugs, into patients in the coming years.
It's going to be an interesting challenge for the ideas of personalized medicine as one of the grand challenges of engineering to help companies create these custom biomarker fed pharmaceuticals to the other side of it, which is as a business you're creating a product that needs to address the masses. Is that one of the leading kind of inflection point challenges of medicine today?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think there's so many other elements of it, which is there's the regulatory side of it. So making sure that as medicines get more customized, they're still safe
Yeah.
and effective. There's also the supply chain issues. So
Mm,
ensuring that, particularly for therapies that are personalized, like CAR Ts, for example, they often need to be distributed in very cold conditions and in ways that are manufactured near to the patient and making sure that that can be done.
yeah.
And then the side that I work on pricing and access as well, just making sure that that's balanced out when it comes to how much companies invest in these drugs versus how much healthcare systems are willing to pay for them. Many of them might extend your life by a couple months, which could be quite a lot. And many healthcare systems are sort of assessing that trade-off to understand if they really want to get these drugs, into patients.
That's fascinating. You brought up CAR Ts and you brought up refrigeration or cold things, and it immediately flashed back to COVID. And then I'm remembering earlier in the conversation you mentioned that you moved to London essentially like when COVID hit, and what was that like for you? And not to bring up the trauma that we all went through, but you went through it at a really unique period of moving and in a different country, in a country that dealt with it differently. And I hindsight being 2020, what was that like for you? And what was interesting about that? Specifically, you have family back in the U.S. and
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think it
it's a
was,
layered nonsensical question. Sorry.
no, I love it because I think I always love asking people about that experience because we all, in some ways, had kind of the exact same experience as far as being sort of
Yeah,
stuck
yeah,
at home.
yeah.
But then, huge variance as far as how it actually impacted our lives. I felt very lucky that I had 2 weeks of in office time where I got to actually like meet people that I was working with before we went into lockdown.
Oh,
And
like
that was so critical.
you moved in like in 2020 right before.
I moved like February 28th,
Holy
2020.
cow, that was
Yeah.
literally 2 weeks.
Yeah. So I had 2 weeks in the office to actually meet my coworkers and build a few like connections, which
Yeah.
was so critical because had I just joined immediately virtually, I think that would have been really, really tough, or maybe not even happened at all. So I kind of barely made it in. And I think, yeah, that really set me up to have like a pretty good working experience as well. And I think socially, Alex had already moved here, I think 3 or 4 months prior. So she had already kind of made a few friends, which was nice. So I
Wow.
sort of latched on to that and I didn't
Yeah.
need to,
Yeah.
yeah, I think it carried me through at least for the first year. But the lockdowns here were a little bit different from in the US. I think we were a little bit delayed in locking down, but then when we did, it was quite strict. So I think that variance was quite interesting. But yeah, I think similar to probably everyone else, like probably didn't see my parents for the first year and then got to see them towards the end of the year, which was nice.
Wow. Okay. Interesting. Um, I always kind of reflect on that time period as like it was so high stress and crazy because no one knew what was going on. I think you're right. Everybody had the same experience, but there was a lot of different results. And it was, I mean, for me, it was like, I had a 5-year old and it was like, okay, we're just here and this is it. And it actually, the one thing I will always say, there's a longer story, but she started kindergarten from home. And so that was an interesting thing. And there's so many different divided views on this. And for me, it was like, well, we're just trying to be safe and stay home. And there was the moment of her starting Zoom school as a kindergartner. And I didn't know how to feel about it, but it was fine. It was happening. She was thriving. She was really into it. She was engaged. And I realized that it actually set forth this whole thing that I wouldn't have had it any other way, that she actually got a slow roll introduction to all her friends. It wasn't
Mm.
like she went into a school without knowing anybody and being
Yeah.
overwhelmed by all these people. It was screens. And
Mm.
there was a moment that I reflected. I think I might have told the story on the podcast already, but at that time, we'd have to go pick up like the weekly packets or whatever, like the
Yeah.
materials you needed. And so you'd like go to the parking lot of the school and pick up your envelope and then go home. And she was walking by one of the daycare facilities because that was still in working. And she's wearing a mask and the kids behind the fence are wearing a mask. And from the behind the mask, hi McKay, and she's like, oh, hi Olivia, hi Luca, like all these other people. I'm like, who are these kids? They're in my class. How do you know them? Like, I don't
Yeah.
understand. Well, they're in my class. Like, no, I know them because they're in my class. And then I'm like, how do you actually understand? Because for
Know
me,
them.
yeah, for me, there was multiple people. I hate to say this. There were multiple VSAs at the time that I only saw en masse that I still had a hard time recognizing.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Because like we hired a bunch at the time, and I never physically saw them for like a year. And I was like, who are
Yeah.
you again?
Yeah.
Um, but she was like, no, I know them. And I was like, then she just kind of came in halfway through the year and like knew everybody. And it
Wow.
was this really interesting, unintended positive consequence of
Yeah.
like not knowing anything and just slow. I'm a huge fan of like my biggest thing is kindergarten should start with 2 weeks on Zoom because it was
Yeah.
amazing.
It was like a
Granted,
slow ramp up. Yeah.
it was granted. Now that didn't benefit everybody, and my daughter's a very particular person. I realize, and the ones that it did not benefit, you can still see why that didn't benefit because
Oh,
it's
yeah.
just certain personalities just don't even function well in the classroom, let alone sitting on an iPad forever. But it was
Oh,
a
gosh.
fascinating, like really weird thing that I'm like, oh, that was really cool, and not at all the plan. But yeah,
Yeah. I certainly wonder how, like, if at all, there's like the long-term impacts of some of this stuff. I
oh,
mean, it
there's so
was a
much.
couple years, but yeah,
There's
I
so
guess it probably
much.
depends on your age, right? If she was 5, that's such a kind of like
we
fungible
were
age, but
we were like magically in the zone because like if she was going into third grade, I could see how that would be like this mentally
mm,
deflating situation. I could, the transition of you talked about the ramp up of like high school to college, and there's different ramp ups in elementary school, and they're not every year, but there's a few years where like you kind of you repeat some things and then you jump and then you repeat and then you jump, and like if there's any one of those years, there's a what they call this like loss that happens. So it's learning loss, which I
Yeah.
don't fully buy into. However, what I do buy into is muscle memory of going to school and muscle memory of learning, and that
Mm.
changed a lot. And if you were going into high school at the time, we've already seen those students go
Oh,
through, and
I
we see
bet.
students now going through, they went through elementary school, middle school, whatever. It's a challenging thing. You throw AI into this whole process, and what you essentially got was this like double hit of a generation or two that has lost that ability to go to a place, accomplish task, and then do other tasks individually. And that's one of the larger issues that we're,
Yeah.
we're going to be seeing as a country, and how that's going to start to affect new employees you're going to get.
And the workforce. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, it's
definitely.
it's really fascinating.